57 to
63,
whatever it is.
yeah.
So let me pass out these for you. These are going to be your handouts.
Typically think on that. We have
I didn't see anything Jewish in that, so I.
Oh, well, you're about to. And to Mary.
That's
Okay.
why we're here with Rabbi.
Okay.
I actually didn't get the
So we just watched our first episode, Finding Holiness in the Twilight Zone, The Big Tall Wish. The synopsis: after winning the biggest fight of his career, a boxer can't wait to tell the little neighborhood boy who looks up to him. The little boy insists the boxer won because he made a big, tall wish. The boxer doesn't believe the boy, saying he won the talent alone. Suddenly, he's back out in the boxing ring on his back, being counted out. He returns to the neighborhood, dejected. The little boy tells the boxer he'll never make another big, tall wish. The boxer convinces the boy not to give up hope, that we all need to believe in something, especially ourselves. And a quick fun fact, this episode was one of the first in history of television to depict African Americans in non-stereotypical roles.
First thing that came to mind,
Mhm.
actually. Yeah.
And Rod Serling's known for pushing the envelope there. What we're going to talk about today is the concept of faith. They talked about belief in the Twilight Zone, and we're going to talk about faith. Now, there's two values in Judaism that we're going to take apart, and we'll try to see how what we saw in the episode relates to some of these themes. So these two values are what are called emunah and bitachon, and we'll define them and we'll talk about their similarities and their differences. Emunah is typically defined as faith, and we take these ideas of the fact that to have emunah in Judaism, in classic Judaism, traditional Judaism, is the idea that God or some divine power exists, and that based on the Torah, based on our Tanakh and rabbinic texts, that God communicates with the prophets or communicates with certain people, makes promises, keeps promises, therefore has the power to do so. And therefore that, as you can read throughout the Torah with the prophets and things like that, that God can be relied upon to keep promises. And a great deal of our liturgy is based on that, right? That the promises that God makes to Abraham of being a great nation and all kinds of things like that extend. And that, of course, we understand, we have faith in that, in those promises. We take God at God's word. So emunah, what I've written here, emunah is the understanding that Hashem or God, Adonai, however you'd like to call God, is involved in the big picture issues. God is involved in life. God is involved in death, war, famine, disease, and disaster. God is involved in which countries go to war, which will enjoy peace, which economies will expand, which will collapse. We read this liturgy quite literally during our high holy days, in the ideas of who by fire, who by water, right? All of that liturgy of what's going to happen in the book of life, right? Who's going to die this year? How are they going to die? Who's going to profit and be rewarded this year, and how? That it is all foreseen by God, right? And in some ways, God has an involvement in it, right? And that's sort of the big picture aspect. But emunah, the faith that we talk about in terms of the small aspects, the minutiae of daily life as well. That God is with us. People say, God is with me, right? Or we walk with God, right? Noah walked with God. People, in our Psalms, we hear, Adonai, you are with me, right? All day, every day, God is the omnipresent, right? God is always present in our lives in some way. God is wherever we let God in. No human being or other power can change our destiny, right? God decrees the fate of humanity, and God is there on the scene to carry out that decree. That's emunah. That's when we read about emunah in Judaism, that's the faith that we're talking about. That God has an involvement in running the world, big stuff, little stuff, global to local, controlling every outcome. Okay, there is a great deal of things in our liturgy that point to this. There's a great deal of understanding in terms of the amount of blessings that we have, right? Every time you see a rainbow, you make a blessing. Every time there's a rainstorm, there's a blessing. Every time you survive something, there's a blessing, because that idea is that God was somehow involved in that, right? So the prayers that we say through our Shemona Esrei, the tefillah that we go through, we pray for Jerusalem, we pray for health, we pray for punishment of the wicked, because in the idea of Judaism and emunah, we pray for that, and hopefully the prayer will be answered, and God will decide to control the world in that way, right? So that is the idea of emunah. And hopefully, at this point, we are able to playfully compare the idea of prayer with the idea of the boy's wish, the idea of that sort of power, the idea of magic and faith. We don't want to use these terms. Obviously, they're loaded terms of magic and promises, whatever it is. But the insight behind it is that there is something that if we ask for it, there is a possibility that we will get it, because there is a larger force, a bigger force that is involved in those, not just the big stuff, but in the little minutia. The idea that, and Rod Serling knew this, right? That if you replace the big tall wish with the prayer and magic with faith, it's the same conversation, right? That you just have to believe, right? And then who knows, it could happen. So that's one side of the Jewish idea. The other side is bitachon, okay? Bitachon, and of course with Judaism, it's never just one word, right? There's always another one that tackles onto it and adds the other part, right? Bitachon means trust, okay? The Chovos Halevovos, this is an old rabbi, he defines bitachon as relying on God, trusting God. It's a sense of depending on God to watch over and protect us, okay? So it's not quite like faith, right? Trusting that God will do the right thing for us is very different than believing that it will, right? And we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? God is kind, loving, and merciful. That's the idea in terms of bitachon. God created us in order to give things for us, wants what's best for us, knows better than we do. And then there's the idea of, while we're responsible to be proactive, we're not in charge of the outcome. That's God's role, so we do our part, and God takes the rest. Okay. So emunah, we would say, is that state of understanding that this is how the world works. Bitachon is the trust that it's going to happen. Okay, two very fascinating aspects of faith within Judaism that if we put them together, we get, the complicated aspects of what we're talking about. So first of all, let's talk about those. Let's talk about emunah and bitachon. What are your immediate thoughts in hearing the definitions of these Jewish ideals? Yes.
Well, my take on the whole thing was that, yes, faith is wonderful and all that, but if you have 4 broken knuckles and you're 32 years old, you're going to lose.
So there are factors that...
The human factors.
That
supersede all of this.
Okay, that's fascinating. So the idea that, there are limits within the human factor of it. So if that's going to happen, then there's just no way, right? You can wish and wish, you can pray and pray, but at a certain point, you should understand maybe that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like you can
Look,
understand
you
that.
should just know that
Just
I've been a Cubs
know.
fan for 65 years.
Okay.
And so that's an important background.
Uh-huh.
You believe in miracles.
So faith
Okay.
only goes so far.
Faith goes only so far.
Right.
Fascinating. Okay, great point.
But in the end, it was successful.
You prayed for
It's a
rain.
hell of a lot of
You
praying.
prayed
Right.
for rain.
Right.
It came.
And that's true. Okay, so again, so we can use both of those metaphors, right? That how long did it take to pray, right, before that happened? Or in our episode, right, that even despite all the factors and variables that were in this boxer's way, his age, he was tired, he broke his knuckles, that it was the faith, it was the belief, it was the strength of the wish that overpowered all of it. But of course, afterwards, we saw that without that continued belief, it fades away. It goes back, right? And he said, what did he say at the end? There's just not enough people to believe in it for it to come true. What do you think all of that sort of relates to our discussion here? What do we think, friends?
I'm still circling back to the point where this imaginary guy was telling him he was a loser. And he broke his knuckles
In the wall.
fighting against the thought that he was a loser.
Right.
And so there's a contrast between the little boy's faith and whatever it was that was driving him to fight, to rage against the dark.
So that person who came in, right, the bookie or whoever whoever he was, right, could have been a metaphor for his own self-doubt, right?
Because
That's
he vanished.
Yes.
so one, right, he
was
vanished,
just a
right?
hard wall.
Correct. It was just a wall, right? So, so that brings into the discussion. Very nice, Tom. That brings into the discussion the fight against what is the power of our faith in ourselves and our self-doubt and that sort of thing, and what happens when we approach that versus sort of the innocent, almost angelic idea of the boy, right? Where it didn't matter. And it didn't matter how old the guy was to him. It didn't matter. He was still going to wish for that, right? What else, friends? These are great. What else?
The other thing that I just started thinking about in the middle of all this was Hanukkah. The Maccabees, it's a perfect example of
Sure,
faith.
sure.
Do we all believe in those 8 days with the oil?
Right. So, so fascinating, right? Is if you read Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, which are the Greek transcripts, the pseudepigrapha, apocalyptic canon books, which tell the story of the Maccabean revolt and all that sort of stuff. The miracles and things like that aren't in that, right? The miracles occur a few centuries later in the Talmud from the rabbis, right? So in a way, what the rabbis were doing, were they saying this is a great story about rebellion and rising up and all that sort of stuff, but it needs something. It needs faith. It needs a miracle. And so they put that into the Talmud, and boom! You ask anyone about Hanukkah, what do they think? They don't talk about Judah Maccabee and the strength of in the war. They go 8 days, right? It sticks, right? That's the better story, right? So the rabbis knew exactly what they were doing there. That the overpowering of an enemy, the taking back the temple, all of that wasn't Jewish enough, right? We needed God's involvement in some way, right? We needed to maintain the faith of it somehow.
Yeah.
That's very telling. Yes, very nice, very nice. Tell me about what do you think about the difference in terms of emunah, which was very sort of, this is how it is, right? Versus bitachon, the idea that it's not as, it's bitachon is not necessarily, listen, God exists. It's more of a, I'm human. I only know so much. I trust that God is going to make the right decisions for me, right? And therefore, so they both lead to the same place, right? Emunah leads to the things that are going to happen in my life for a reason, because emunah, right? Bitachon is, because this happened, well, I don't know why this happened, but I trust that it's part of a system that is larger than I am. I trust that, right? What do we think about those two sides of Jewish faith? And we can disagree with both, by the way. It's a very particular theology. Yeah, Jan, you're shaking your
It
head.
doesn't work.
Doesn't work for you.
Yeah,
What part doesn't work? What part doesn't work?
I'm a cause and effect, and when I'm surprised, and I have these certain people that break my soul, that like to talk to me because I'm the chosen person.
Yeah.
But I don't give the credit to God if things are out of this or this realm works. I don't give credit to me.
Right.
I don't know, but they're like, oh no, that's because of God,
Yes.
Jesus. But I mean,
Right,
this
right.
doesn't work for me.
Right. And that's a very particular theology, and that's okay to say that. Yes, Beth.
We were just having this conversation yesterday. And I don't remember what we were talking about. Anyway, for me, whenever we start having these conversations about God, it always comes down to me of what or who is God for you?
For you.
What do I think? I mean, because if you think that God is this powerful being that, to me that's anthropomorphic. That's, that there's a human element to God that has a brain and
Sure.
happen. For me, God's more of an energy, a concept, and I've chosen to have some trust and faith that there is some kind of a divine, I prefer the word to holy or sacred, but a divine energy. And I have a prayer time every morning, and so I put prayer out there, but it's more that I'm setting my own intention for the day, trusting that there's something maybe greater, but I have the whole anthropomorphic powerful thing.
So there's bits and pieces, and I think, by the way, all of us take that, right? We take a Jewish concept of emunah, bitachon, and we take the bits and pieces that make sense to us, and we manipulate, because there's many of these things, right? There's deists who believe that God is the clockmaker and just let things go, and God has nothing to do with those little things. There's those who believe that, like a parent, God used to be very involved in our lives, splitting the sea and doing all this stuff, but as we've grown up, God sort of let go. There's hundreds more, right? But we do see, in terms of what we would call very traditional or observant Judaism, or even an observant or very orthodox, whether Judaism or even Christianity, Jan, as you mentioned, right? That God is always on the lips, right? God is always there. This was God. This was what it was, right? That sort of thing. And I always tell the story of back in my past life when I used to work at a record store, long before my rabbi days. And I've told this story many times, but it's always very relevant. Is that a woman came up and she put a CD up, and it was marked $15.99, and I scanned it, and it was actually like $12.99, and I said, guess what? It's $12.99. She goes, oh, great. And I said, we're running a special today that if you get the CD, you get CD cleaner as well. And she looked at me, and she looked up, and she said, Jesus has blessed me twice today. And I thought to myself, that was me, right? I put it on sale, and I made the decision to give you the cleaner, right? But in her mind, right, the decisions that were made by others were part of the plan, part of the emunah that had to do that. And the lesson that I always teach about that is that emunah and bitachon are good to have in parts, but if you push too much emunah and too much bitachon, at least in my personal opinion, you take away the human factor, that sometimes humans do nice things or not nice things, right? There is a Talmudic principle that says that everything is foreseen, but we have free will. And that God foresees everything, but there is still a bit of control in what we do. Obviously, that comes into conflict with, as all Jewish concepts do, they come in conflict with each other. But with the stringent ideas of emunah and bitachon, that you decided to get up and do something that day, it was planned out for you to do that, right? The ideas of fate and all that sort of stuff. But we're in between all of that. Yes, yeah, Tom.
Twilight.
Yes, we're in the Twilight Zone. So yeah.
So I'm going to look at this because it looks like this is a good metaphor for physics, or physics is a good metaphor for
Oh, great. Okay.
the uncertainty principle. You look at God, you can't, by examining God, you change it. If you look at an electron, you try to see it in one place, it's not in one place. And so the taking that sort of scheme of concepts, the emunah is the big picture. The bitachon is right now. And what you're doing right now is you are living your life as if you were blessed by God.
Right. It's a
And when the big picture is that because of the big picture, and it's odd that prayer exists in the first and not the second, because the first one, if God determines everything, why even pray? But in the second one, where you're looking at the moment and you want something to happen, that would be the time to pray within that concept. But instead, within that concept, you just do the things you're supposed to do and to trust that that's what's going to get you through the day.
And you bring up a good point there with that, Tom, is that if you believe in the stringent idea of emunah, that everything is planned out anyway, why pray? Right? Everything's going to go the way that God wants. Well, the bitachon side is that God wants what's best for us. And so if we might have an idea of what's best for us, we better ask for it, right? Now that, of course, comes into conflict with the omniscient idea of God, that God knows better than we, right? So all of this comes in conflict, right? But that's why there's such big topics, okay? Yes?
In terms of the miracle,
Yes.
having said what I said previously, I will also share that I do think that sometimes things happen that we can't explain. People get, and I'm going to use Jimmy Carter as an example, but however long ago it was now, he had brain cancer. Very, 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 very few people recover from brain cancer. It's almost always terminal.
Sure.
And yet, Jimmy Carter, in his advanced age, no less, and he's a deep Christian, but Jimmy Carter recovered, so supposedly, may just be a very long remission, but he recovered from brain cancer. That's sort of unexplainable, truthfully. I mean, or you could say, well,
not if you know about the drugs that have been developed.
well, I was
that
getting
helped him.
there, Lou. I was gonna say, or you
Man is in
or you
there,
could be very
okay?
skeptical,
Yeah.
very skeptical, very
Right.
cynical, and very reasoned, and say, well, he had some super duper chemotherapy,
Right.
that most people aren't able to afford or whatever. But I do think sometimes things happen that you just can't explain, and I'm okay with that.
That is what you're talking about, Beth, is why these concepts exist, right? There are things that occur in the world, good and bad, where they defy explanation. They defy reason. And we're not talking about necessarily just things that happen and they don't seem that's real. We're talking about heavy stuff, right? The Harold Kushner, right? When bad things happen to good people is part of this discussion, right? If you're righteous, why did this happen? If the wicked people, why are they not, right? All these sort of problems, and all this comes down to, right, is the idea of emunah and bitachon and all that stuff comes in direct conflict with books like Job, with the books of Deuteronomy, in terms that praise, righteousness will be rewarded and wickedness will be punished, and all that sort of stuff where, Job tells us Job was a righteous person, but got punished anyway. We don't know why, right? There's a system up there that we don't understand. And at the end, God says, where were you when I created the world? You're a little puny human. I know better than you, right? It's very, pointed. It's a very pointed sort of theology that you're supposed to take away from that. So if we take all of this discussion and we move it towards the idea of the Twilight Zone, if we replace the big tall wish with prayer, and if we take magic and we replace it with miracle, faith, divine intervention, right? What is the moral that Rod Serling is trying to teach us? And remember, at the end, and I said in the synopsis, right, he said, don't give up hope. We need to believe in something, especially ourselves, and that there aren't enough people who believe for the miracle to work. Where does that take you? What road does that take you down? and not your own personal belief. I mean, obviously your personal beliefs or whatever it is, but along these lines of what we've been talking about.
Well, I didn't even.
I think it's a Hasidic, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that's a Hasidic idea. That's why you have mitzvah mobiles.
The mitzvah mobiles.
To get everybody to believe, to come back. And if enough people believe all at once, then the Messiah.
Right. Right. And it's very orthodox ideas that if everyone would just do what they think is the right way to be a Jew, then the Messianic era comes and poof, we're there, right? Or the evangelicals who believe if we would just ship our butts over to Israel and enough of us are in Israel, boom, they get their second coming. Hooray. So, you're right. But that's, we're playing around with that, but that's the idea of a communal power of faith, right? That the reason why things aren't happening is because enough people just don't believe it, right? That's a very real religious, it's a reason for proselytizing. It's a reason for, right, fundamentalism, right? Is we just need to get people to believe, and once they do, magic.
And so what's your take on why Rod Serling put that in there?
Oh, well, Rod was very brilliant. I mean, his stuff is just.
And was he a religious Jew?
No, I don't think so. But very philosophical and was wise enough to know, what were the hot buttons, right? We'll watch more episodes and you'll see. This is why I'm doing this series, is because there's little hints that he left for us, right? I have a hard time wrapping my head around it, right? We automatically cringe at stuff like magic, right? Because it's such a loaded word, right? It
reminded me a little bit as you were talking about the Jimmy Stewart movie, the Christmas movie.
Yeah. Wonderful Life.
Wonderful Life.
Yeah,
it's been
sure.
a billion times.
Right.
And that's one of those things where faith will win out.
Right. Exactly.
And all that. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I think there is a, if you ask for my take, there's a difference between what we watch, right, and the world that the other people create and our own. So, we don't see stuff like this, but what we are supposed to understand is that maybe either we're missing it, right? That maybe there is some stuff that's happening that we're just missing, right? Or we're just supposed to take the lesson from it, is that the real problem with the boxer was that guy, that self-doubt, that if he hadn't doubted himself and gotten so angry with his self-doubt, maybe he wouldn't have busted his knuckles, and maybe he would have won, or maybe he would have fought well. I mean, we don't know, right? That's the idea, the choices that we make, right? The choices that we make.
Explain the first ending to me, because
the first ending was
I'm not a real
that
abstract thinker. I'm a pretty literal thinker, to be honest with you. So
the first ending was that he was on his back.
right,
The wish was that he never got knocked down.
right.
And so through magic, switched the guys, changed the memory of everybody, and said that he won and the other guy lost.
Okay.
Now, the only one who remembered being on his back was him
It was him.
and the kid who made the wish. Everybody else saw a different fight that nobody else
And he
remembered.
was the one
Right.
with the self-doubt.
Right. Exactly. And he was. And remember,
And then he tried to convince himself.
he tried to convince himself, and then for a little bit he did. Right. As he said, I was never off my feet. I was the king that night. Like I was that guy. Right.
Which one was the
Right.
real one?
So the real one was the second one. It switched back.
But the white guy won.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. It switched back because he
Didn't
refused to
believe,
believe. Because the kid was trying to
Okay.
convince him what happened was because of my big tall wish,
Miracle. Yeah.
the miracle.
Okay.
And he said, no, there's no such thing as miracles. And the kid's trying to tell him, no. In order for the miracle to work, I have to believe it and you have to believe it.
Okay.
And the minute he doesn't, it fades away.
That's nice. But I still, to me, interpret it, it's human actions that are involved. His
Sure.
self-doubt, his
Sure.
inability to go through with it all was the ultimate result. You can have faith in God, and God can have all the good things for you, but it's your actions that determine the outcomes.
Right. And that is what I put here at the end here is everything is foreseen, but we have free will. In other words, there might be a plan, but the truth is we're all over the place. We humans have all kinds of self-doubt and choices that we make, good and bad, that we do. Yeah, Jan.
I took it, some of it was just through the eyes of a child. 'Cause
Yes.
I love the innocence and the belief. I
Yes.
My grandchildren, and they're just like, oh, I don't want you to be burnt by the world. And realize
Right. It's a very,
and so
hard
through
lesson.
The eyes of that part, I was like,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, I knew you're going to be burnt so bad when you're older. But there's something about through the eyes of a child in general, and especially about how they view the world, be it religion or not. It has all those components.
Yes. Let's talk about. I want to take Mary's comment. Yes.
I was just gonna say, the part about the ending, the real ending,
Yeah.
was that the child's faith was basically ruined. And I just really thought that, to me, that was sad.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, when, his faith and his belief were basically
Yes.
shot down.
So both of you are hitting on an important part of this, right? There's this beautiful innocence in the boy that he says everything's possible. You just have to wish it, right? And we listen to the words of the boxer being like, someone's got to take him and put his head down on the concrete. That's what the world is, right? That at a certain point, if you're following Rod's writing and you're following all this stuff, at a certain point, you lose your faith. At a certain point, you're too old to believe in miracles. You're too tired to believe that there's something like that. You get beaten down by it. Literally, this guy was beaten down by it.
There's another Jewish filmmaker that uses children a lot like that. That's Spielberg. Okay, if you go through some of his movies, it's through the eyes of a child.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
And us old people do
Right.
bad things.
Right.
Yeah,
And
even in Schindler's List, he had that little girl with the red coat.
Bingo.
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we see, and not just Spielberg, but others, right? We see in you watch any movie, right? Where the child sees magic or the child knows something or whatever it is. Who's the first naysayer? It's the parents. It's the older people, right? And I think the Twilight Zone is hitting on this, right? Is that at a certain point, it seems silly, it seems ridiculous, and remember how the boxer reacted, right? He started to get angry with the boy, being like, no, it can't, because it starts to affect who you are. And you see that in those other movies, right? That the adults always, get angry with the kids for believing that. So, right? Well, that says more about the older people than it does about the child, right? That it affects, they can't handle that. They've been, so if we relate that to bitachon and emunah, at a certain point, you lose your emunah, right? You have some bitachon, but it's hard to hold on to. Something in life happens as you get older that your trust in it starts to fade away, or it starts to evolve into some other belief system that we have, right? That it's divine energy, or that I have free will, or that whatever it is, right? Life experience affects what we have to do.
See, that's
Yeah.
where I think, for me, as I had more life experience, I started to, and I'm still not really totally this way, but I started to lose, I don't want to say faith, but not to necessarily trust people, certain kinds of people. And I'm a very much of a see the best in people, trust people, give everybody a second and third chance kind of person. But along the way, if you get burned enough or hurt enough, if you trust enough, if you're naive enough to think, oh, this boss is going to be better than the last one who totally threw me under the bus,
Right.
and they're not. You start to get a little more wary.
Sure.
But that's me, and that's human. That's a human interaction.
But it's not necessarily so removed from this, Beth. I mean,
Well, I was getting ready to say,
oh yeah,
that
go ahead.
doesn't mean that I've lost faith in my belief in the divine energy. It's just that that's where the free will comes in. That these are not such nice people.
Right.
This is not my belief in this divineness that's at stake here.
And that does connect to emunah and bitachon. Is that if you have full emunah and bitachon, you'd say, well, there's a reason why this guy's being a jerk to me, and there's a reason why or whatever it is. I'm supposed to do something about it, right? Or you can think, human beings have free will, and I'll find another route or whatever. It's a very complicated concept, right? Yeah.
There is a very interesting way to play out in that little boy. teaches us that it is it's a perpetual struggle. It's not just an individual struggle. And you have a responsibility to the next generation
Mm-hmm.
to don't let the candle, let the flame
Right.
burn. And,
Right.
And right at the moment that this film is being made, people are trying to integrate Southern universities.
Right.
They're singing "We Shall Overcome."
Right.
And if you've come to the end of your life and you haven't succeeded, I think the message is you can't give up because you want the struggle to continue.
Right. And I think the timing of it is really important, and we always have to look at things in context. And I think you're right. And I think that, if we think about what the boxer said to him, because he said maybe there's no such thing as magic, and you see, like as Mary said, this sad moment where the light goes out. Right. We know that it did work, right? But the light went out. But instead, he replaces it. Well, maybe there's something else. Maybe we don't get exactly what we want at every moment, but there's something else there. There's something to believe in besides that. So the episode gives us 3 or 4 theologies to pick from in terms of faith, right? There's the faith that emunah, everything's whatever it is, There's some that doesn't work. There's the idea that everyone must believe in it. And there's like, well, don't believe in magic, but there's others, it's all in there. Right? These concepts, these Jewish concepts, are all in there. Any other thoughts that we wanted to add to the
So
discussion?
Sterling wasn't a religious Jew, but
No.
he was Jewish.
Yeah.
Do you think that he that he realized that there were Jewish sparks in his work? I know that's a big question.
That's a big question. I mean, I don't know, and I don't want to say one way or the other. I think that the same way that we look at people like Freud and stuff like that, that if you're born Jewish and you have some sort of Jewish understanding, education, it creeps into what you do. It just sort of is there, perhaps subconsciously. I think that Sterling picked certain topics to speak about, the episodes that he does. About certain issues. I think that shows about his character, and a great deal of his character reflects Jewish values. But I don't want to make a direct line.
And your fun fact about this being one of the very
Correct.
first things to show African Americans in a
Right.
positive light
Correct.
is
And
important.
correct.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that you see Jewish values in
Well, that's the whole point of this course, right? Is whether they're there or not on purpose, right? We can
Everything
advert.
like that, Rabbi?
I know.
I
not
wouldn't
everything.
have picked,
But-
I wouldn't have said, oh,
Right.
Twilight Zone, Jewish values. I mean, I
Yeah,
wouldn't
but
have
they're
connected
there. But the thing is they prompt discussions about Jewish values and show us ways to wrestle with difficult Jewish values, and that's the point of our curriculum this
So
fall.
also remember that boxing was big time in the 50s. It was on television in prime time 2 nights a week.
Yeah.
Wednesday and Friday
Wow.
nights, if I remember right.
Wow.
Yeah, but
And-
aren't these same concepts essentially in most religions?
Yeah.
The meaning of, a belief in a deity of some sort, and a trust that that deity is going to be a power in your life in some way. So
In Western religion, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not strictly a Jewish view. It's one that permeates anybody that has faith, that,
Sure.
in something that is not defined.
Sure. And I think that's fair. I think I'm not trying to impose Jewish concepts into the episode. What I'm saying is that the things that occur can start conversations for us about Jewish values, more so than there aren't any Jewish Easter eggs. Sorry for the no pun intended in the Twilight Zone. Yeah.
It was really interesting when we met with Saint
No, First Baptist.
Perspective. But, and it was a very nice group of people, but it was on certain things, it was like, well, that's just a given that you believe,
Right. Very different views of faith. Yes.
They might have looked at those 2 words as, well, of course. it's
Correct.
not true.
Or at least some of them, right?
Not even questioned it or
Mhm.
Well,
pondered
right,
it.
it's
some of the people did and some didn't.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you have ideologies is a given, but
Right.
but again, I think I said earlier on that I choose to believe. in
We all do.
Or, I was going
Yeah,
to say,
yeah.
that's the difference. It's not Christian or Jewish, it's that it's a difference between literalists, fundamentalists, and questioners. People,
Right.
you can be a questioner and still have a certain amount of trust or faith or whatever you want to define it.
Right.
And I don't think it's Jewish or Christian.
Yeah, no, it just,
Yeah,
it
I
just,
think that there's all the degrees.
I
of
remember
faith.
their look of it. Question.
Right.
Yeah,
Are you at least going to do that again, by the way?
Yeah, we're going to do it hopefully this next month.
November?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do what, Beth? I missed?
I have a.
Joint classes with
with First
First
Baptist.
Baptist.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. We'll do that again.
Very-
Yes, Tom.
That's question of Rod Serling.
Intentionally.
Right.
The first, there were lots of Jews writing
Mhm.
for television, for theater,
Mhm.
but the first musical comedy that had Jewish characters in it was 5 years later than Miss Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
People who were bursting with ideas that they wanted to portray, but they couldn't put them in Jewish form.
Right.
And so they chose metaphors.
Mhm.
And they also had to appeal to the big audience that would want to turn on the TV. So they had to universalize what they were saying. But I think the bedrock is from this.
Right. And I think there's-
Jewish home.
I think that's fair to say. But again, I think the goal of this course is to be inspired by these concepts, which were breakthrough concepts. The Twilight Zone started an entire genre of sci-fi. All of these concepts that we talk about in all of these episodes, they hit home at the time, whether it was racial relations, immigrants, religion, fundamentalism, power, arrogance, Nazism. I mean, all of it is in there. And so I hope that there's a great deal that we can take from it this semester. So let's end there. And thank you guys very much for being here for the first episode.
Okay.
All right.